for this year as well, this is their last season at Highmark Stadium before they move to their new stadium, which looks incredibly similar. It's similar to Spurs. It's pretty much exactly incredibly similar to Spurs' their new stadium. It's like you look at it, it's like, oh, where they got the idea from there.
Just let's take a moment just to appreciate one of the best names in the NFL in Storm Duck. Just let that sit there. The fact that he has the possibility to be the starting second corner potentially, it's the irony. I have a random deep fantasy league where we have IDP that has 3 cornerbacks, and he's on my bench because this league is 24 teams deep, and I picked him up purely on name value, and now he's actually usable in that league. Another
new era in New York. How do you feel about I know, exactly. How do you feel about the future of the Jets this time? Don't forget to let us know how wrong you think the two of us are as well about your teams, especially if you're fans of these teams.
I am fully expecting an inbox of angry Patriots fans. I'm ready.
Absolutely.
Hello, everyone. Cecil Martin here.
Hey, this is Hunter Henry.
What's up, man? This is Max Crosby, part of Raider Nation.
Hey, this is Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman.
Hey, it's Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks.
Hey, this is Jerry Judy, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, and you're listening to the 14-Yard NFL Podcast.
We have live football tonight for the first time since February as the Chargers and Lions face off in the annual NFL preseason kickoff game, the Hall of Fame game. This means that the NFL regular season is just 35 days away, so that means that the time has now been more perfect to kick off the season. And the podcast preview episodes, and we're going to do that this year as we did 2 years ago. We're going to go through and preview basically the NFL division by division. So today is the turn of the AFC East, and joining me to break down a division that has been won by the same team the past 5 seasons is our resident fantasy expert, James Fotheringham. Welcome back to the pod, James. How have you been?
It's been an interesting off-season. I've already fractured my wrist at some point and had that fixed, so
nice.
The injuries happen in the analysis stages, not just the people out there on the field.
I've been lucky I've not been injured so far this summer, but knowing how clumsy I am, I wouldn't put it past me either. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on as always, James. We'll start the podcast by looking back at this division, the AFC's last year, before deep diving into each of the 4 teams in a division and predicting their win total for the season. Now, a year ago, the Bills continued their dominance over the division, winning their 5th straight title in what for them was meant to be a rebuild year, equaling their franchise record of 13 wins. This time last year, the division was predicted to be one of the closest in the league, but the Dolphins and the Jets both massively underperformed expectations. Miami finished season second in the division at 8 and 9, and had Tua Tagovailoa been healthy the whole season, they likely would have finished inside the playoffs, or at least getting a wild card booth. But they went 2 and 5 in the games that Tua missed, and only one of those games was against a team with a win record. So had Tua played those games, maybe they could have got in the wildcard round. But with Miami against good teams, had they made the postseason, they likely would have been soundly beaten by, I think it would have been Buffalo they would have played, and again they would have been soundly beaten. So really not too much would have happened if Tua was healthy anyway, because they continue to struggle against good opposition in 2024. The Jets actually stayed relatively injury-free, especially on offense, but the Aaron Rodgers experiment ended in a big power struggle, which added more dysfunction to one of the league's worst-run organisations in the last 10 to 15 years. Rodgers himself actually played pretty decently, but their defense was a big disappointment, especially against the run, and they were also really bad in close games as well, and that was because the standard of coaching was poor, hence why Robert Saleh was dismissed at the start of the season and finishing 5 and 12. And then the Patriots finished in 4th in the division. They were a mess in their first season without Bill Belichick, and their coaching staff went one and done. That's how bad they were last year, but they looked to have a bright future at quarterback, and are certainly on the up going into this season. Heading into 2025, though, it's still the Bills' division to lose. Reigning MVP Josh Allen and Sean McDermott, the head coach, and the Bills are big favourites to the division. Miami needs to get to the postseason for the coach and GM to save their jobs, and on the other hand, the Jets and the Patriots are all changed, and the Patriots, as I mentioned earlier, have plenty of reasons to be optimistic. So it just shows how much can change in a year, doesn't it? But that's an interesting division this year.
Yeah, it's funny how it's one of those divisions where the thing that was inevitable the last few years looks like it's still as inevitable as it was. Yet you put the other three teams in a hat, and any one of a number of outcomes could possibly happen. And obviously, we'll talk through what each of those is going to be, or which one we think it's going to go. But yeah, there is an awful lot of time, and there's a lot at stake for the Dolphins. I think they're probably the ones that have got the most pressure to perform. I think you say the Jets and the Patriots have had the coaching changes, have sort of instigated. I almost want to say rebuilds, but the Jets haven't. They've just tried to retool, I suspect. But obviously, major quarterback change there. So, spoiler alert: if you've not been following all off season, I suppose I better say that at the outset. But no, it's going to be interesting to watch second. And really, I think the key thing here is, can any of the three teams not called the Buffalo Bills make the postseason? Because they're going to need to get a decent record to do that. I can see there's a world where you could make an argument for any of the three of them, and you could make a very good argument for none of the three of them. But absolutely. I suspect even if the Dolphins made the postseason, it might not even be enough. They might need a postseason win, given how long their wait's been. So
yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, I was going to say it's still Buffalo's to lose, but this division has got one of the easiest schedules. All four teams have got a pretty easy schedule this year. They do have to play the AFC North, but they also have to play the NFC South, and that there should have plenty of wins for all these three teams there. So they're certainly all within the sort of top 10 or so easiest schedules. As the Bills are reigning champions, we'll start with them. We'll go in alphabetical order down. Now, the big question for Buffalo heading into 2025 is not whether they can win the AFC East, as we mentioned this. It's whether they can reach Super Bowl or even win one. That's it. Last year, Josh Allen took the sort of next step to superstardom. He cut down on his turnovers massively, which was the one thing that was holding him back to just 6 interceptions. And he added reliability to his already ridiculous physical ability to win his first MVP award. But despite beating Kansas City in the regular season, again, going on that run in the fourth quarter that won him the MVP award, Allen, they fell short in the playoffs to the Chiefs again. As I mentioned earlier, they've won 5 straight division titles, but in those 5 years, they've had 2 AFC Championship game losses to the Chiefs, one AFC divisional round game to the Bengals, and 2 more divisional round losses to the Chiefs. So they've had the season ended by the Chiefs four out of the last 5 years, and 3 of those games were by 1 score as well. So so the question for the Bills really is, going into this season, going into the off season for them, it was like, so what have they done to get over this sort of Mahomes and Andy Reid sized hump? Well, again, as they had previously, they've retooled their secondary and their defensive line. That's what they did previously. This time, hopefully, it works for them better than it did before. In come Joey Bosa and Michael Hoyt coming over from the Chargers and the Rams, whilst they've also added Larry Ogunjobi from Pittsburgh, but he will miss the first 6 games due to suspension. They also used a day 2 pick on TJ Sanders on that defensive line too. The Amari Cooper experiment didn't work. They also lost Matt Collins in free agency, so in come Josh Palmer and Elijah Moore as new toys for Josh Allen. And after adding Dane Jackson and reuniting with Tre'Davious White, who was in Baltimore for a season, they further retooled the secondary with the addition of Maxwell Hairston in the first round of the draft. How do you look at the Bills now compared to where they were last year?
I suppose the other thing to mention on top of all that as well is Josh Allen signing his shiny new $330 million contract with $250 million guaranteed for 6 years. So, the bridesmaid's going to be there a while. At least that's probably what Chiefs fans call him anyway. But yeah, in terms of, is it going to be enough? I think is the key question. And last year was meant to be a rebuild and was meant to be all about bringing through something of a new defense. They obviously weren't quite there. The defense had a lot of decent numbers when it comes to turnovers, but they were not good when you take everything into account. You need to be good, run game, pass game, everything, and they just weren't. So the retool will go some way towards it. Is it enough? I don't know. We know that Josh Allen is good with the firepower on the offense. So even not having what people would consider like a number one wide receiver, that wide receiving core is, I call it a plethora of wide receiver twos, because a lot of those players can very much be the two on a number of teams. But, I mean, Khalil Shakir got a new contract as well, and he seemed primed to be decent as well. Josh Palmer coming across, escaping I don't know how to best put it, but he was always the sort of second or third in command, and he was always effectively the Mike Williams injury replacement with low expectations. So here he's going to have a little bit more on his shoulders as well. Whether Keon Coleman can progress as well. They're all players that have definitely got potential, but are they going to cope without an alpha there to distract defenses with some attention? So I have my doubts. One person who does need to pick up for them in terms of the receiving game for them to really have a chance is Dalton Kincaid, because he had a pretty rough season last season. Fantasy owners will definitely attest to that. And he needs to find the end zone a bit more and be a bit more dominant in the middle, really. So there are, despite the fact it almost doesn't help them that they are so dominant in their division, that they've got so many easy games, because really their season is all about building up to that AFC Championship game against the Chiefs, which is...
Well, look, week one's a good test. Playing Baltimore in week one, that's a good test. But you want to play them later in the season, ideally, because
you'd want to be playing them sort of about not the last 3 weeks when you're trying to get your energy levels sorted out ready. Those is where you want the reasonably easy games. You want to be playing them right in the middle of the season, sort of your week 9s, 10s area, so that you know that everyone's in full flow. You know what you're dealing with, and you've got the challenge, and everyone's settled in. Week one's obviously always a bit of a risk, but it could go many ways. I mean, to be honest, if you're the Bills, what you're probably hoping is another team knocks the Chiefs out before you get to the AFC Championship game. That might be the way to get rid of the hoodoo. But yeah, it's if the as we said, it's not about the AFC East. It's about how far can they go all the way. My gut feeling is still no, but I don't think it's one of those where I don't think we're going to know the answer until sort of that week 13, 14 area of the season. Bye weeks are over, and we know what this defense actually plays like. We know what level they are now at, and
a lot of it is
too much of an unknown.
Yeah, will Joey Bosa stay healthy? He's a really big trouble staying healthy in the past. Now, admittedly, I feel like with the way that Buffalo use their pass rushers, they just rotate in and out all the time. That's actually really good for someone like that, because he's not going to be on the field all the time. So, but we'll see what they can do. Now, I think they're about the same. Maybe a little bit better. I feel like maybe a little bit better, especially on defensive back. But then, I also really trust Sean McDermott to do well with defensive backs, because that's where he's found good players to contribute straight away. So basically, they've still got Josh Allen. As long as you've got him, you're at least in the wild card mix. Let alone how bad the team is, how good the team is, you're probably going to win a division. And I feel like I love both play callers. I really like Joe Brady, and I feel like if this team can stay healthy, and and as I mentioned with the defense, especially defensive line, I think is so key, because that's been the one big Achilles heel on defense, is getting the pressure in the playoffs. The best case scenario for them, if everything happens, if they can get a healthy defensive line going into January, I feel like they can do it because of who they've got, and they've. I think you're basically guaranteed to get one of the big four quarterbacks in the AFC in the Super Bowl every year. It's just who it is, and. This year as well, this is their last season at Highmark Stadium before they move to their new stadium, which looks incredibly similar. It's similar to Spurs. It's pretty much incredibly similar to Spurs' their new stadium. It's like you're looking at it's like, where they got the idea from there. It's their last season. It's like they got their last season at Highmark Stadium this year. How fitting would it be for them to have that AFC Championship win, maybe the 1 seed, in over the Chiefs in their last game in that stadium.
Sorry, I'm just having visions of the last game win the AFC Championship, and just every single room there is just fans jumping on tables, just jumping through tables. It's like, do you know what? We're going to leave here now. It's the last game we're playing here, lads. Wreck the joint. just a great image for everybody. Don't worry. But it would be a very fitting tribute, and it feels like it should be their time. And we said earlier, they lost a lot of these games where they get knocked out of the playoffs by one score. The team needs to just be one score better, or one score and a field goal if you really want to be picky. But they only need to be that one score better. Is the slight incremental gains going to be enough? We've not even mentioned the running game, which is a fancy. I feel disappointed in myself. I was thinking we're going to end up down this route anyway, but James Cook looks like a reasonably decent player, but behind him you also have Ray Davis, who also looks to have a 3-down skill set. So you've got two backs who could do any one of the 3 downs and have got the power and are going to, I'm sorry fantasy fans, probably help to disappoint you by vulturing off each other. However, when you are an NFL manager rather than a fantasy manager, that's brilliant because you can rely on both of them. And if one of them's having an off day, you just pivot to the second.
Well, again, we mentioned the pass rush. The one thing, they also needed a run game in the playoffs. Last year, they got that. That's why I felt like the year, because they finally had that run game last year. This year, James Cook, he's not got his extension. He wants that extension. He wants to stay in Buffalo. He's got something to play for as well. So if he can stay healthy as well, he's got the extra motivation. He's got the extra motivation knowing that he's going to be a free agent in the off season. As to for example, running backs in contract years normally overperform. So you've got that there as well.
Yeah, because they know that their second contract is the hardest one to get. Buffalo took a risk because they knew that he was a potential who could hold out. But running backs holding out doesn't end well typically. Look at Le'Veon Bell. Amongst many others, there's not just him. He's just, as a Pittsburgh fan, that's the one that scars me the most. They've even got Ty Johnson behind who can do a bit of third down work as well. If they lose one of them for a few weeks, they still have backups. And put it this way, if they lose a wide receiver, they've got 6 more behind anyway. So they're not going. They've got depth when it comes to the offensive positions, and then with defense should have enough to be able to rotate and keep fresh as well. The depth might be the thing that gives them that extra score. At least that's what they're going to be hoping.
So for their biggest strengths, I've obviously got Josh Allen. I've also got the run game down there as well, because I feel like in the postseason I knew
that was where it was going. That's why I went there.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got their weaknesses. For me, it'd probably be the lack of number one receiver. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but then as we saw last year, Allen makes those guys better anyway. So does that really matter?
In the nicest possible way, have the Chiefs really had a number one wide receiver in recent years? It was meant to be Rashee Rice, and then he was injured a lot of last year. The last time they had one was Tyreek Hill in reality, and even then he was. He wasn't necessarily. He was the number one wide receiver when it came to fantasy points, when it came to targets and everything. But he's not your typical number one wide receiver, in my opinion. It's just that he's the one that got the ball the most because of the way that they chose to play, which was chuck it long, he's there somewhere. So, and it was effective. So the Chiefs have proven many times that you don't need to have a number one. You just need to know what you're doing and have a very good quarterback in the middle to spread it out. And Josh Allen is that. So
yeah, absolutely. Let's finish the Bills by guessing their win total. Most bookies have their line set at 12.5 wins. The Bills have the 8th easiest schedule in terms of strength of schedule. Obviously, they get a ton of wins in division. I think they'll be good at home too, especially they were 8-0 at home last year, 9 home games this year, and it's their last season at home as well. So I'm going to go with the over. I feel like based on their schedule, I probably would actually bet the Bills to be the 1 seed because they've got of all that sort of the main contenders in the AFC, they've got the easiest schedule. And if they get the 1 seed in their building, maybe this is the year that they can beat the Chiefs in the playoffs. But it is a massive if. But I just feel like with the schedule, I'd bet the over here.
Yeah, I'm going over to. I think they'll get 13. I think they'll match last season. I think it'll be a very similar story. I almost think it plays out very similar to last season for the Bills, in all fairness. But I think their fate actually lies more with what the other teams do because I think there's a possibility that you might lose the Chiefs before you get to the championship game, but there's also a possibility that they might get there, but then have an additional weakness that the Bills can then make the most of. So I think it's 13 wins, but a better 13 wins than last season in terms like mentally.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Right, let's go over to the Dolphins now, though. They're coming off their first losing season since 2019, but they're in need of a big culture change in 2025 for that current regime to keep their jobs as they wait for the first playoff win in 25 years. They'll hit a 25-year wait this January, and that is the longest streak in the NFL. This season is it for Miami. If they don't reach the postseason, this Tua, Tyreek, Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer quartet are done. And all four could potentially be gone this time next year with the way certainly with the way Tua, Tyreek and Tyreek's contracts work out. It's crazy that a team that has had so many winning seasons, recently isn't a scenario like this, but because of the lack of playoff win, because of the falling short at the end of the season every year, the clock is truly ticking because they cannot beat good teams. As a head coach, Mike McDaniel was 3-15 against teams with a win record, and yet he has a career win record of 28-25. So basically, the Dolphins beat everyone they should beat, and then when it gets to a big game, they just completely falter. Now, obviously, some of that is the fact that in a lot of those big games, he's not had Tua. So Tua has missed a lot of those big games. But in some other games, they've not looked well coached, or they've not looked tough enough, and they've been dominated in the trenches. So this offseason for Miami has all been about changing their culture. Chris Greer has finally invested draft capital into both lines, and they've basically moved on from anyone who didn't want to be in the building. So this experiment of building a super fast team, well, yeah, nearly, pretty much. I think Tyreek's just Tyreek though. So I feel like everything that Tyreek Hill says, you just sort of take it a pinch of salt, pretty much. But we'll talk about the relationship there in a minute if you want. This experiment of building that super fast team has had some incredible results at the start of the season. They always start the season so hot. I think they started 3-0 the last 2 years, and they had a hot start before. Well, they beat the Jags and then lost to Buffalo when Tua got concussed last year, so they started hot as well last year. But we always see the best from Miami like really early in the season, and once they get a bit banged up, as every team does, then that's when they fade. And last year was the worst case scenario because pretty much every key piece was banged up. Obviously, Tagovailoa missed 6 games last year, 4 due to concussion and 2 at the end of the season due to another injury. I think, and then Austin Jackson went down the right tackle, and he's so key in the run game. Once he went down, the run game went, and that meant that teams could just put 2 safeties back really high because there's no threat of a run game, and then that limited basically the rest of the passing offense. And then those receivers started to get banged up, and that wasn't the same either, so it all just went completely wrong. Also, when Jaden Phillips went down, I think after 5 games, that's when Jalen Ramsey's production just fell off a cliff as well. He was playing really well first 5 games, then completely fell off a cliff after those 5 games. And then don't forget that Bradley Chubb missed season 2 as well. So they should look completely different to last year because of all those factors. And yet, I'm speaking about how bad that team was, and yet they won 8 games despite missing the quarterback for a third of the season because they beat everyone they should have beaten, as they always have done. It's just such a fascinating team because the talent's there, but they just don't. They only beat the team they should beat, and then when it gets to crunch time or when they just disappear.
Yeah, they are sort of the team that feels very computer generated, even with the fact that the human characters in it very much don't feel computer generated. It is very much plug and play. Your sort of football manager rep rolling, as I call it, which is this team is better than this team, so they win. This team is worse than this team, so they lose, as you say. But this season feels very much like the opposite of that. It's very random number generator at the moment. You've got how many concussions has Tua got left before he's forced to retire? And even if he doesn't, how good is the player that he's left in that head of his? We've mentioned Tyreek.
That's the thing. Yeah. Well, I was going to say it's been.
Let's go Tua now.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So with Tua, the game. So when he came back from the concussion last year, if you actually look at EPA and stuff, it was actually his best season in terms of in terms of EPA series. I think it was fourth in EPA per play, or because it would be EPA per play because he didn't play all season. But so per play he was fourth, and then in success rate he was second to only Jared Goff. So in terms of executing the offense and making off things happen on the offense when everything else is broken, he had a good season in that aspect. The only game where he struggled was the Houston game where the pass rush just completely killed him, and that's the game that he got injured in ultimately at the end of the thing. And that's but in terms of how he played last year, I'm not really worried about how he comes back. It's more for me, can he actually stay upright, and what version of Tyreek Hill are we going to get? Because last year he was banged up, and pretty much in training camp.
In both senses.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's the problem you have with Tyreek. He's either injured or in prison, or at least in trouble for something that he's done. Seems to always be in the back of a cop car or an ambulance. Take your pick.
And he quit on the team at the end of last year, and there's been a bit of a this to start this training camp. There's been a bit of Tua's not letting him forget that. Pretty much every ball at training camp is going to Jalen Waddle rather than Tyreek Hill right now. Jalen Waddle's having a crazy training camp, and Tua's not thrown an interception yet either. So he's balling thrown just to Jalen Waddle. Maybe that's something to watch. But in terms of those two, we'll see what happens. But I think right now it's just. I feel like when the actual suit up in week 1 against the Colts, everything will be fine. But certainly some storylines of this team, aren't there?
Yeah, it's that wide receiving core in general is just going to be very interesting. Anything could happen. Tyreek could potentially just walk out and say, "I demand a trade" before week 1 even comes around. Could end up having an absolutely monstrous preseason, and suddenly everyone hyping him up. Could end up injured and just doing nothing. Could end up purely released because he just doesn't want to be there and he's actually dragging the team down. There's so many things. Jalen Waddle needs to stay fit, much like we've said with Tua. If Waddle can stay fit, he has an opportunity and a half. I sneakily really like the Nick Westbrook-Ikine pickup because they've needed someone of his ilk, sort of power stature, run style, everything, especially with the loss of Jonnu Smith. Because we mentioned earlier with Jonnu Smith going to my Steelers and then bringing in Darren Waller, who is going to take a little bit of time to heat up. He's been out of the game for a year and a bit, so they put him originally on the PUP list just because he wasn't up to speed. He didn't have an injury. It was just that they were being careful with him. But I almost think Westbrook-Ikine takes up more of that Jonnu Smith target share than Waller does.
He's a good run blocker as well.
He is.
He's a better run blocker than Jonnu Smith.
Yeah, he is going to be on the field an awful lot. The other thing to talk about Tua quickly is they signed Zach Wilson this offseason, which means that their backup situation is probably the strongest it's been in the last few years.
And Quinn Ewers had a really good start to camp as well. There's a real battle going on at the moment for that second spot.
That's the insurance that they need for Tua, that if it does go wrong and he does get injured, be it short-term, be it long-term, they're not quite as dead as they've looked in previous seasons. Zach Wilson will be capable enough to beat the teams that they should beat. And that was where it all went wrong last season. They didn't have a quarterback in play that could beat the teams that they should be.
They averaged about 12 points per game without Tua. And then with Tua, it was almost top 10 standards. Yeah. It was completely different. And Tyler Huntley's a Pro Bowl quarterback. That's the he's played well levels for the Ravens before. Just shows how broken that offense was without Tua.
Yeah.
Right.
And speaking of other things broken in our offense, say Devon Achane has the potential to have an absolute breakout. Well, I say breakout. People already rate him highly, but he could have a monster season potentially, given the way that team's going to line up and the way the points are going to be scored. But at the same time, say you have no Mostert to back him up. You've got Alexander Mattison joined,
so you've got Mattison, you've got Ollie Gordon,
and Jalen Wright, isn't it?
And Jalen Wright, yeah.
So it's Achane is the guy there that has the history with the team, the experience, and the know-how. Wright is going to have to step up this year and almost be that too, I think. And then Mattison's in case of emergency break. Like, it's basically, if they lose Achane, Wright and Mattison together equals just short of an Achane. So, yeah, it's one of those where you could almost afford to lose Tua more than you can afford to lose Acham.
Yeah, I can see that. Especially because he's involved in the passing game quite a lot as well. He's some points last year he was almost a slot receiver. To be honest with you, in terms of the amount of receptions that he got before Johnny Smith started taking over with all those sort of underneath receptions, Acham got a lot of those as well.
Yeah, fantasy in the fantasy world, the thing that surprised me is when the Johnny Smith trade was announced, I was like, right, Acham to the stars. I pretty much in my head went straight away with Johnny Smith gone and those targets vacated, with Mostert gone and with no real pass catching running back brought up. Acham should be a first round pick in fantasy, and the quality of players in fantasy this year, he's still a second rounder and isn't looking likely to jump up into the first. But if you are at the back end of the first and beginning of the second, he's one of the best second round pairings you can get. But yeah, moving away from fantasy for a moment, defense.
That's the next thing in his team because, well, the defense is the big question. There's one clear weakness right now, and that's corner. Well, the secondary in general, really. But it's better than I thought it would be a few months ago because they managed to turn around, maybe cutting Jalen Ramsey into getting Minkah Fitzpatrick. So in terms of you've still got a star player there in the secondary, or at least somebody going to lead the unit, and then and then it was all about getting a sort of starting boundary corner, which they tried to do. But then Kader Kohu, the nickel, has gone down. He's the Dolphins' best corner on the roster, which sort of says how bad that unit was going into training camp before. He's been ruled out with a season-ending knee injury, and then two other projected starting defensive backs, Ashton Davis and Ifeatu Melifonwu, are also hurt right now, but they should be ready for week 1. I like those two guys as a safety with Minkah. It's going to be very Ravens. Anthony Weaver obviously was in the Ravens before he came to the Dolphins. It's going to be very Ravens, 3 safeties, 3 linebackers a lot of the time as well. With there are going to be less corners on the field than most defenses normally because it's just the way the defense works. But Mike Hilton inside, I think that's a great pickup now, especially now that Kohu's done because he can just play there in the slot. You're going to get some sort of decent level out of him.
Yeah.
On the boundary, you've got Jack Jones, he's very boom or bust. You've got Storm Duck, Cam Smith, and Ethan Bonner, who could also play, maybe Kendall Shepard as well. But those guys are all very inexperienced, so that's the one area in this team. But with the pass rush, will it matter? And that's the thing. That's the pass rush is so good that it can counteract, and how long a quarterback's actually going to get to dissect this secondary, and that's you've got Bradley Chubb's healthy, Jalen Phillips is healthy, Chop Robinson had a good rookie year last year, impressed people with how good he was in the run game as well, and then you've got Zach Sealer inside. There's a chance on passing downs that they could have all 4 of those guys in one line because Phillips has been lining up inside a lot in training camp. So that's scary enough having those 4 guys. But if you have got a good offensive line, this cornerback room is a big concern.
Yeah, just let's take a moment just to appreciate one of the best names in the NFL in Storm Duck. Just let that sit there. The fact that he has the possibility to be the starting second corner potentially, it's the irony. I have a random deep fantasy league where we have IDP that has 3 cornerbacks, and he's on my bench because this league is 24 teams deep, and I picked him up purely on name value. And now he's actually usable in that league. But, I mean, by all accounts, from what I saw of him last season, he didn't actually look bad. He looked like one of those players that could genuinely develop into something very much usable throughout the season. And in some ways, the way that defense is built, that's all he needs to be. Yeah,
exactly. It's, I think that what it's not going in with these guys is okay. It's about that you're going in with 5 new starters and everyone's gone now because Kohu's gone. You've got 5 new starters in the secondary, and I think that's more the early on it could get ugly. I guess the offensive line is the other thing that you can really look at and says that's probably the key to the success, because you've lost Teron Armstead. Now Patrick Paul, the replacement, who's come in, he was a second round pick last year. He played about 300 snaps last year, and he didn't look great, but he was always a project guy. In terms of training camp, it sounds like he's been handling Bradley Chubb really well, so that's a good sign in that aspect. And they've got a good starting five, I think. It's just beyond that. If one of the guys goes down again, there's no depth behind them. Those guys, and that's the issue. And again, if you do have injuries in the offensive line again, and then Tua's going to get hurt and everything. So with this team, it's basically just we're going to the win total in a minute, but it's just if they can keep Tua upright, they're going to be there or thereabouts. It's just whether they can keep Tua upright.
Yeah, it's the O-line hold the key to all of this, and that's their weakness, I think.
Yeah, it is tough. I think they're a lot more confident about it than like the media are, but it's what you're going to get like it was 2 years ago, but last year when guys got injured, that's when it all went to hell. And I think you absolutely should hold the magnifying glass over that unit, because you don't know whether to trust them or not. Okay. The bookies have set the line for the Dolphins at 7.5 wins, whilst the Dolphins have the 10th easiest schedule. For me, it's all about the start. The Dolphins always tend to get out to a hot start, and if they can get to a hot start, then maybe I would go for the over. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, there certainly are some winnable games in there. I think it gets harder off about week 9, but I think Miami could be 5-3 by then, and then they only need 2 wins the rest of the season, and. And they've got out of the bye week. They've got the Saints and the Jets. So there are going to be games there. So I'm going to go over 7.5. But if it were 8.5, I'd probably go for the under. I think the fact that it's 7.5 rather than 8.5 makes me go for the over. But if it was 8.5, I'd definitely change my mind, I think.
It's a tough one, because it's like I went into today before I did more research and everything, thinking my first thought about the Dolphins is dysfunctional, struggling, rebuilding, and that the coaching team is on its last chance, and that usually last chance in coaching staff never ends well. But there's enough pieces there that it really is, can the O-line keep Tua up, and the Zach Wilson in rebound, if he's not, is that enough? I think, with the 7.5 total, I have to go over, because I think there is enough there, but they are one injury to any one of about 4 players, probably, away from that being seemingly impossible. So it's like a very volatile over.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think it is very close, and if it was just 1 point higher, I think I would seriously consider the under.
I would have done exactly the same.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on to the Jets now. Now they've got a completely new regime and a completely new quarterback. They've recently committed to their key cornerstones in Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner, but around them, the new regime probably has a little while to go before they are contenders we thought they'd be probably 2 years ago, because the talent has maybe taken a little bit of a drop from 2024. New head coach Aaron Glenn is a former Lions defensive coordinator, of course. They've got a new offensive play caller in Tanner Engstrand, who was essentially Ben Johnson's number 2. He was a pass game coordinator in Detroit. And they've got a new DM in Darren Moogie, who spent the last 12 years in Denver's front office. He was the assistant GM there for the last couple of years. It's another new era in New York. How do you feel about the? Yeah, I know exactly. How do you feel about the future of the Jets this time?
I'll answer this tactfully, the same as I did all the other times. Yeah, it's got a chance. Don't know. Don't know how much faith I have in it. Let's wait and see. To be honest, I think not having Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback is a good start. He says as a Pittsburgh fan, but I think having sort of a nucleus in there that does seem a little bit, stable. Having Sauce Gardner, is a franchise player. Garrett Wilson tied down now as a franchise player. You've given Justin Fields
Quinn Williams chance. Too. He's got 2 years left, I think. So
so you've got Justin Fields, who's coming in to have a chance to be a franchise player for them. Breece Hall in a prove it year, effectively. He's sort of last year flattered to deceive, and injuries played a part, and now you have a running back room that has a lot more depth to it. So he's not going to be the 3-down back that fantasy players dreamt of when he was drafted. But as a cohesive unit for the NFL, that might not be a bad thing for the Jets. There's no lying. The Jets' defense was awful last year, and having a head coach that's more defensive-minded from a very good defensive unit last year. And
well, it's bad, but it was also the number 3 defensive ton of yards. It's just they're a terrible situationally. It's crazy how a team can just completely flip, isn't it? It's like
it just needs to say. We said with Miami that it's very much the coaching team's last shot at it, and this time they're getting a first shot. They're going to get a mulligan, but with effectively they don't need to improve everything. They know that there are 2 or 3 areas of that team that are actually pretty well set. You've just got to get the rest of it on par, and then probably have a bit better luck with injuries, and forget that you are the New York Jets. A lot of that team, I think, is going to just come down to mentality. And I think there's probably been enough turnover in personnel, both coaching staff and players, that they might genuinely forget that they are the New York Jets in terms of the history and albeit bad, and that they are a cohesive football team that has a decent roster. I say the word "could" very strongly in that, because there's something about that team that is just cursed, and it can, if they break that, then anything can happen, but probably not catch the Bills. But still, it's again, this could go one of 2 ways. Justin Fields could be an absolute baller, show that form that the very early Pittsburgh weeks showed, and ball out. Garrett Wilson be on fire. Breece Hall become the former self, and that defense live up to the expectations of previous years. And all of a sudden, we're like, oh gosh, the Jets have turned up quickly. Or they could just implode and week 1 just be completely dire.
The big question is, what will Justin Fields do in his last chance as a starter? Obviously, you mentioned it earlier. Aaron Rodgers is out of the building. Obviously, he's now in Pittsburgh. In his place is a guy who started 6 games for Pittsburgh last year in Justin Fields. Obviously, 2021 first-round pick of the Bears, and this is his last chance. And if it's not going to work here with a star receiver in Garrett Wilson, another good one in Josh Reynolds, who's been well in a couple, been good in a pretty decent number 2 receiver in a couple of places now. A nice pair of running backs as well. 3 really, if you look at it that way. A on paper decent offensive line if it works. It's quite athletic. If it's not going to work, in New York with all those players, it's not going to work anywhere for Justin Fields, is it?
No. It really is Fields' last chance, and to be fair, the salvo in Pittsburgh gave him the chance of having that last chance, because otherwise he was done. And will it be enough? I think, to be fair, that team will benefit from him using his legs and doing what he does as well. And I mean, you effectively have Hall, Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis, and Justin Fields all able to run the ball, and they're going to be a run-heavy team. I mean, we've said Garrett Wilson is going to be the number 1. He very much is the alpha. Josh Reynolds has been brought in as a very good number 2. After that, Alan Lazard is still there as theoretically the number 3. And then you've got Tyler Johnson, Arian Smith, who was drafted this year, and Malachi Corley, who dropped the ball last year, and that's all anyone ever remembers of him now. So the depth on wide receiver is not there. If they lose Garrett Wilson, they're done. That's the one thing I will say now. He's the one player, if he's injured, they cannot recover.
No, I agree with you there, I think.
It wouldn't shock me at the same time if Alan Lazard is a stealer by the end of the window, because Aaron Rodgers has his friends. And if he goes, he's been my sneaky pick in fantasy. Like he's off the back end of 15 round draft boards. He's well into the 16, 17, 18, even 22nd round in deep drafts. No one's been picking him, despite the fact he is possibly the wide receiver 3. In some people's eyes, the wide receiver 2 for that team. But if he disappears and goes to Pittsburgh, who do you don't see anyone there who you think is going to step up, and that worries me. That's the one thing really that worries me. I mean,
also, when you've got a rookie tight end as well, and Mason Taylor.
Yeah, Mason Taylor, rookie tight end, is going to He's going to have to hit the ground running. He's going to have to be a Sam Laporta. He can't afford to be what Titans used to be, which is, as a rookie, you don't do anything in the first year apart from learn how to run block, and then you start developing into a pass catcher and doing everything else. Now you pretty much have to do it from the onset.
Especially after they lost Tyler Conklin as well. He's a big role now.
He was.
Yeah, with I think Fields would probably be their biggest weakness. Yeah, and you can probably say that their strength. It's probably the defensive backs. I'd say it's been a bit of a weird one because they've lost DJ Reed. He went to Detroit. Obviously they lost Devontae Adams and Copley on the offensive line and Hassan Reddick. But they've added Brandon Stevens, which I really like from Baltimore as to replace DJ Reed. They've got Andre Sisco in there as well at safety, which from Jacksonville I really like. They drafted two players on offense. Membu and Mason Taylor. Obviously mentioned Josh Reynolds as well. It's not quite like for like talent replacements, but you look at that defense. Committed to two players on that defense now, on Quinn Williams and Sauce Gardner. And I mean, you look at the defense on paper, it should be good. Their strength should be their defense. Is Will McDonald, he's an interesting player. He got 10.5 sacks last year, but he was horrendous against the run. So you got that. And hopefully, he can make another leap and then learn it. Jermaine Johnson being back for them is huge because if he can get close, I think he got 9 sacks the year before. He obviously missed it all last year. If he can get that production as well as McDonald, then I think a lot of this team actually. I look at this pass rush and I'm like. If they can get that pass rush going with their defensive backs, then this defense could be scary. It's just whether you look at the guys beyond McDonald last year, and they had no one on their pass rush. So I think that's huge. If they can get both of those guys going, this defense could be hard to deal with. But both of those guys have had bad injury, and beyond them there isn't much there.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge variable to the Jets' success this year.
This could be one of those situations where you don't necessarily look at the personnel. This is where the coaching change is the biggest change to a team. That you've got a much more strong defense. I'm not saying that Salah wasn't, obviously. He very much was but that's when he was in San Francisco. But this might be a regime change where you didn't need to change many of the pieces, just the coaching needed to change, and it could very well work. There's times where, say, again, fantasy head also works in NFL head in this case. Sometimes a coaching change makes a bigger difference than free agency in some teams. And the Jets are one of those where that is completely possible.
Look at the Dolphins, for example. In the division, they had 10 wins before Mike McDaniel came in. He came in, he had 10 wins, but the way they played football was, they were way more productive than they were with Brian Flores, who basically bullied his team. It's two different styles of coaching. It is how Seattle last year, another thing. Mike McDonald, completely different completely different head coach to what Pete Carroll was, and they had a decent year. Now they've obviously hit rebuild mode a little bit this year, but I can see exactly what you're talking about there. It's more about I think they'll be better this year in terms of wins than they were last year. Yeah, obviously 5 wins last year, but I don't think they're half as good this year as they were last year. It's mad how that works out, isn't it? But it's like, I like the defense. This defense could be top 10. If the offensive line works out, again, this offensive line is promising. You've probably got 2 rookies starting on the offensive line. But if they pan out, everything I'm reading, Membu's having a great camp for them, and that's huge. It's basically if their lines turn out to what they should have been last year and on paper could be, then the Jets could surprise, as you were alluding to at the start of the podcast.
Last year they had all the hype and failed to deliver. This year they have none of the hype, and I think that might actually help them again as well. And I think, we'll get onto the Patriots in a second. I think they are in line to have the opposite.
But, do you think? Ooh, Okay, that's an interesting.
We'll get to the Patriots in a minute, but I have thoughts that are contrary into a lot of others.
That's interesting. Okay, we'll go on to predicting the Jets win total now. Now the bookies have set their line at 6.5 wins. They have the 13th easiest schedule, so that's the hardest of the AFC East.
Division, yeah.
I'm leading the under here. It's not because I actually really like this team. I feel like, but they've got a really hard start. If you look at their first couple games, they've got Pittsburgh, Buffalo, the Bucks, the Dolphins, the Cowboys, the Broncos, and the Bengals before their bye week. I think that's week 9 their bye. So that's a lot of tough games there before their bye, and that's the only reason why I think 6 wins is probably about right, just under the line. If they had the Bills schedule, if they had the Dolphins or the Patriots schedule, which we'll get into later on, I feel like this team could get 8 wins, 9 wins. But they've got a hard schedule that starts tough, and for a new coach and stuff, I worry about that a little bit. But again, I honestly feel like they could. If they have 8-9 wins, I wouldn't be surprised, because I feel like it's there. It's just about how the coaching staff does.
Yeah, 5.5 wins, I'd have gone the over. 6.5 wins, I go the under, because I also think 6 is about right. But it's I would say it's the one I have probably the least confidence in, and I think. Ironically, I think a lot of this, indeed, second in this division, I think comes down to what happens when the Dolphins play the Jets. I think those games are actually going to mean a lot this year, because they're both teams are going to see that as the winnable game, but only one team can win it. And if any team does the double, they are finishing above, the higher team in the division. So I think the first game between those two is critical to how the season plays out.
Yeah, well, I think the Jets and the Bills and the Dolphins all play each other in the first 3 weeks of the season, or something like that, or maybe it's first 4 weeks of the season. Either way, there's so many division games in the AFC East to start the year that it's certainly going to be tense from the off. Yeah, exactly. You'll set a tone. Yeah, exactly. Okay, we'll finish off with the Patriots now. Now, unlike the Jets and the Dolphins, they're perceived to be on the up. They're seeming excited from what. Purely by what they saw from their young quarterback Drake May last year, because the rest of the team was trash. But they're also overjoyed at the hiring of highly sought after head coach Mike Vrabel, who of course was a club legend and Super Bowl winner as a player for the Patriots. They had the most splashy off-season of all teams, spending $364 million on 16 players, which has transformed their roster. That's the second time they've done that in about 4 seasons. The first time it won a playoff game, but then all the players that they did sign the first time didn't really end up as big investments, and a lot of those players are out the door in about 2 years' time. This time they've gone for the more. I think they've been smarter about it this time. They've got basically just invested in the lines and on defense rather than paying Hunter Henry and Johnny Smith like they did last time, which was just looking back at it, you're like, what was that about? But again, new regime, isn't it? It's obviously Super Bowl champion Milton Williams from the Eagles was the big one. And then Mike Vrabel got Harold Landry, obviously, who he worked with in Tennessee. They've also added to the offensive line with Morgan Moses and Garrett Bradbury, and then they also drafted Will Campbell and Jared Wilson really high as well. So you probably got 4 new starters on that offensive line. They also added Carlton Davis and Marcus Epps at defensive back, and of course went and got Stephon Diggs too. Now this team obviously last year was a candidate for the number 1 overall pick. So to start off with this season they were very, very bad, especially on offense. But now this is a completely different team, which should hopefully see Drake May take a step out right, because now at least he's got competent guys with him, and he showed some flashes last year, especially basically scrambling for first downs and stuff. He basically put the offense on his back a lot of the time because there was nothing there for him last year.
Yeah, it's one of those where, you look at all the parts and you go, this is definitely a better team than it has been the last few years, and they should very much not be bottom dwellers in the league. They're not looking at the first overall pick, and they're very much, no one's billing them as that, and including themselves, which it's right, let's be honest, it is very much that. I'm just concerned a little bit. I think I'll start with the defense first, since I've always started offense each time. I think that defense actually they've been very smart, and I do think that defense will live up to most of what it's expected, which has been a lot better than last year and being solid.
They were 22nd at both yards and points allowed last year, so they were sort of
They will be better.
below average. But this year, I think top 10. I think that's where they should be aiming for. I think it probably could be quite achievable because of the players they have on that team.
My concern really is I think the offense is overhyped.
I
think Drake May. I don't necessarily think Drake May is necessarily overhyped. I actually think he does look like a very capable, very competent quarterback who is going to be their linchpin for years to come. I don't think people are ever going to be questioning him. I just don't think the rise is going to be as fast as people are thinking. I think people are expecting them to be a playoff team already, or at least like 7, 8, 9 wins straight off the bat. The strength of other teams in the league, especially defensively as well, I still don't see it there. And all the rumblings I've heard from camp is all the work that they've done on that offensive line has not necessarily paid off. I've heard a lot of reports that offensive line is struggling horrendously in camp. So
Will Campbell's not had a good camp. Obviously, they drafted him to be a tackle, and a lot of the league viewed him as a guard. So that was
the first faux pas that they made. Stephon Diggs gives them a wide receiver 1, but his decline's been rapid in my eyes, and I think he could be more of a hindrance than a help with the way he bought himself out of other teams and did not make friends in the process. He's going into a team that's got high expectations, and if it starts going slightly wrong, his head's going to just drop quickly, as is his physical ability, I think, as well. He seems to have lost a little. I think it's partly because he's not at the upper echelon anymore and he was being overtaken, and that he didn't take kindly to that, but I don't think he's necessarily made himself better to be able to compete with it. They have a lot of good young wide receivers around it, but they're all developing, and I hate to say it, they need a better role model than Stephon Diggs.
So that's it. So
it's really harsh to say.
The one they're really excited about is Carl Williams, who a lot of people had as like a second round guy, and he fell a little bit. Some people had him as a first round. I think Chris Sims had him as like the third or fourth best receiver in the class, but a lot of the league viewed him.
A lot of the league, him, but yes.
But like that's the thing. So a lot of people really liked him, and the Patriots, he's had especially first couple of days of camp, it sounds like he's had a pretty good camp. But again, I feel a little bit more, well, probably a bit more positive about the Patriots than you do. I think they got the hire of Vrabel spot on.
That's
obviously they should have done that last year, but obviously it may be better for him rather than not having the pressure of succeeding Belichick. Maybe better for him. Obviously, I think that having known how bad it was last year, now he instead of will he take over from Belichick, and now it's just, can you make the Patriots decent again? And I think that's a good start for him because of how bad they were last year. Again, he's a great coach. He's got a really good record against teams in this division as well, which I think is brilliant for them in the future. And as long as him and a GM get on well, I feel like that's got a recipe for success. It's just him and he's basically lost 2 GMs in Tennessee because of not seeing eye to eye. So how that goes, we'll see. But look, I think they're going to be a strongly coached team. I think they're going to be disciplined. A promising looking defense and a young quarterback who many are expecting. I don't think he's going to have like an amazing year, but I do think he'll be around QB 15, QB 16, something like that. And I thought that was good enough for Mac Jones to make the playoffs with a team similar to this 4 years ago. And I feel like that may be good enough for a team like this to get to the playoffs this year. But again, like you were saying, the offense is the weak point. The offensive line, we don't know what it's going to be, and the receivers, I even like the run game as well. What Ramondre Stevenson? What Ramondre Stevenson are we going to see? It's their offense beyond Stephon Diggs. There's a lot of guys that you're rolling the dice on in fantasy that you're not feeling confident very much. For example, in your world, and
the irony. Travion Henderson is being drafted very highly, despite the fact he will not be the starter to start the season. It will still be Ramondre Stevenson, and there will be a changeover some point during the year, I imagine, which muddies the water even further unless one of them gets injured. Antonio Gibson is still there or thereabouts in that team. Hunter Henry is still there as a tight end, and I think could be more important to that team than people again give him credit for.
He had a good year last year. Hunter Henry had a good year last year.
He did, and they've done nothing to change that position, really at all. It's still him and Austin Hooper, and it's still Hunter Henry on receiving duties, basically. I almost wonder if the run game is almost hindered by the fact that they are two, in my eyes, quite similar players in many respects.
I agree.
There is no 1A, 1B. It's that it's sort of 1A and 1A. And I think that there's some argument for you go with the hot hand, but I think they're each going to want to be, the one, and it might cannibalize them a little bit. But other teams have managed to get through it in the past. It's up to Vrabel and co to actually, sort all of that out. And we keep talking about backup QBs. They've got Josh Dobbs this year, who, he's had history of, coming in as a number 2 and suddenly being useful, and then someone trading for him and regretting it. But sometimes in this league, with the way that injuries and QBs go down, I only really bring that up because of how worried I am about the O-line, and that I can see this being a year where Drake May's growth is stunted by injury because the O-line lets him down so badly, which is the only reason why I mentioned Josh Dobbs as a way of getting out of it.
The only other thing I was going to say is you've got the return of Josh McDaniels again.
Yes.
as OC again, which obviously again last time he was in New England, he got Matt Jones to the playoffs. So he has called. Yeah, you look back at it, but then obviously in his 2 head coaching jobs been horrendously bad. Could have had a third, but he walked out on the Colts, didn't he? But
some people just are not head coaches.
Yeah, but last time I was in New England, that Matt Jones offense, obviously it had a little bit of Cam Newton as well, the year before that. They found a way to win games. I feel like this offense can find a way to win games. Now, Drake May has had a great start to camp. I think he's another one that's not thrown an interception yet as well, which for a second year guy is quite promising. But again, if I feel like that's going to be a lot of, which is what New England have done in the past, especially McDaniels. There's going to be a lot of basically just thrown to random guys.
Yeah.
Especially you running back passes, but then again you haven't got your James White in this offense, have you? And
I also think, further to my Stephon Diggs thing, if they're trying to go down what we said earlier with the Bills about not having a one and the Chiefs and all that, why do you bring in Stephon Diggs? Unless fair, you can consider him as a wide receiver 2 level wide receiver if you really want, and then say that we've got a bunch of wide receiver 2s and it's a very similar scenario. But his head is not going to think that. He's going to want to be peppered targets and think, I'm better than everyone else in this room. I want a lot of the ball. And he's going to be annoyed when he doesn't get it. And that kind of atmosphere in the locker room, I think, is going to get rough very quickly. And in last year, Drake May didn't have that to deal with. I don't necessarily feel like he had a diva-style offense because no one really expected that much either. And again, it wasn't a star-studded room. Now he's got one guy who could be demanding. It's going to be interesting to see how the character holds up. I mean, if Stephon Diggs has changed his mind and decided that, okay, I'm just going to knuckle down and get on with it, that might change the whole way that I think about the Patriots, if I'm honest. That could really propel them to something major. And if they, but at the same time, if they give in and just pepper him with targets, I can see it going wrong as well.
I thought you've got the coaching to deal with a player like that. If this was in New England last year, I completely agree.
Yeah, you'd have had no chance.
Yeah, but I just I really like Vrabel, and I'm excited to see what he does with this defense because their strength. You mentioned their weaknesses. Their strength is their defense, especially the secondary as well. Like Christian Gonzalez is a star. Carlton Davis as well. So it's a good number 2 corner. I like the safeties, Kyle Duggar and Julius Peppers as well. Marcus Jones is a good guy in the slot as well. And then they've added to the defensive line. Sounds like Keon White's having a really good camp on the edge for them as well. I just think they're decent in all 3 position groups, which for a cohesive defense, I think it's really good for them. It's why I'm quite high on them because this defense, I think this could be the best defense in the division. if I'm being honest. And then
It's possible.
and then in that case, you could potentially, I feel like you could slow down. Vrabel has done very well slowing down the Dolphins' offense. The Titans were the 2 games in December that the Dolphins needed to get into the playoffs against the Titans. One with Flores, one with McDaniel, and they got completely outcoached and basically manhandled in both of those games. So going into that, those 2 games against the Dolphins, I feel like they're probably going to get the same thing. He's very good situationally, especially in matchups against teams in this division. So that gives going into the win prediction now, that gives me quite a lot of confidence for them. Now the bookies have them potentially doubling their win total by setting their line at 8.5 wins. Obviously, the 2 reasons why: obviously the roster overhaul, but also like the Patriots have a last place schedule, the 3rd easiest schedule in the entire NFL. So I'm going to go for the over here at 8.5, which I feel like you might not agree with me, but I just feel like, as I mentioned, like Ray was a great coach. I think I went through and looked at their schedule. I feel like 10 wins is a real possibility because obviously you've got the NFC South teams, and then you've got the 4th place teams in the AFC as well. So I just feel like there are certainly 10 wins, and I gave it could be 11 wins. I was quite lenient with these 10 wins. I feel like that on a day they could beat the Steelers, for example, but I gave the Steelers a win. That I feel like there are games like that where I feel like they could. They could at least contend in. It's really a 50-50 game. So I'm going to pick New England to go over here. Because just basically, and again, I just feel like the bookies are underestimating the opponents these teams face with the lines. I think it's more that I feel like most teams would probably go, well, Buffalo maybe 4-2, 5-1, and then everyone else are probably going to go 2-3, 3-2. Like if in terms of 4-2, 2-3, those kind of close. Maybe I feel like the division games will be quite close, and so I feel like I think the Jets got the hardest schedule, but again the Patriots and the Dolphins, the 2 of them, based on how easy their schedule is, I feel like teams they're underestimating them because of that. If this Patriots team was in the AFC West, I'd probably have them at 7 wins, but because of the division they're in, I absolutely can see this team getting 10 wins.
Yeah, we had to differ somewhere, and this is where I say I've gone with the under on the basis that, say, if I went for the over with the Dolphins, the wins are going to come from somewhere. But equally, I think some of them 50-50s could fall on the wrong side. I just don't think they're quite ready to ascend the heights yet. I still think it's a more gradual step progression. I think next year the hype will be real, and I expect to say what's happened with the Jets. They had a lot of hype last year and then sort of fell short. I think the Patriots have the hype this year and are going to fall short, but have the potential to have a very good ramp up next time. And I don't think it's this season that's really their fight. I think it's next season, and it almost would help them to have a couple of knocks and have the learning curve. And I think there's a few games where, there may be questions of, Drake may get them over the line in certain tight games, is what the narrative will become. But I think it might make him stronger by the end of the year, having that education, I guess. And I think the offense is what holds them back, but a year of extra experience, a year with that coaching regime, a year to get everything together, I think next season they exceed whatever is put up effectively. I just think the hype's come a year too soon.
Yeah, I agree with you in the fact that I feel like they're probably more likely to be the second best team in this division next year than they are this year. But this year, based on just the coaching impact straight away, I just feel like they've got a great chance to have a 9-10 win season this year, just purely based on the people they've got in the building, just completely changing things. And I think that but I agree with you. I feel like next year is their year where they can really go and think, hello, if we can get some just 2 more pieces on offense, now we can try and challenge Buffalo. So I agree with you there. Right, that's it for today's episode. Thanks for listening to us preview the AFC East, and don't forget to let us know how wrong you think the 2 of us are as well about your teams, especially if you are fans of these teams.
I am fully expecting an inbox of angry Patriots fans. I'm ready.
Absolutely. Right, you can follow us on Twitter at full10yards or drop your thoughts in the comments. Big thanks to you, James, for coming on. It's been great having you on again. Great regular guest for the network over the past couple of years. And if you enjoyed the episode, a quick review really does help us, especially on the podcast platforms. It helps us keep growing and hitting the algorithm for recommendations. And if you're watching us on YouTube, a like would be highly appreciated. So many of you guys that listen, if you look at the data, aren't subscribed. So if you'd like to get notified when we do upload next, which will probably be in about 4 or 5 days' time, don't forget to hit the subscribe and the notification bell buttons, which are right next to each other. I'll be back next week with another guest as we continue our division previews ahead of the 2025 season. But until then, I hope you have a great rest of the day. I'm Sam Moores. This is the 410 Yards NFL podcast. That's bye for now.